Hey everybody, and welcome back to a Whitecloaks live stream. Sorry for the couple minutes of delay. We had a couple technical difficulties trying to work through some stuff, but ultimately we're here, and we're just going to talk about the I suppose new Wheel of Time book is no longer really that apt. I think it's been out for I don't know, a few months at this point. It came out at the very end of last year. So you guys may or may not have sort of encountered something about this book before. Probably most of our viewers are at least aware of its existence. And I'm going to bring on our guest today. He is our fearless leader for the Band of the Red Hand Discord and a OG White Cloak himself. So without further ado, I'll bring him on so he can talk a little bit, and we'll dive right into this. And thank you guys all for coming on to give him a warm welcome. So here he is.
Howdy.
Hey, how's it going?
Pretty good. I just spent all day going back over the book, putting up about 9 pages of notes.
I think that's crazy. So how many total pages of notes do you have? Sorry, before we get too far into this, I think you at one point said something that I was like, man, I'm not nearly a professional enough streamer for the amount of work that you've put into this. So was it just 9? Did you whittle it down to 9? I thought it was more than that.
No, that page number I initially gave you, that was the page number of the book I was up to. My notes, okay. I have 10 pages of notes, about one of which is just photos. On the off chance I was going to be sharing something, but yeah, it's just bullet lists, so it's a lot of empty white space. But yeah,
nice. Max, I think that our very own fearless General Matt Cauthon, I think he might be the only one who braved buying a copy of this. So you got yourself a hard copy of it, right? You have the hardback.
Yes, it went with me on my trip to my wife's home country last year and read through it while I was there. Took a lot of abuse in the book bag, which it deserved.
I will say I've been really looking forward to this conversation with you because I think I said this in our Discord when the book came out and you said that you were going to get it. I was like, well, I'm looking forward to having a conversation with you about it because I want to know whether or not it's worth buying. So hopefully, among many other questions and answers we'll get to that sort of final question and answer of whether or not the book is sort of worth it. Let's see. Before we get too far into this, I'll just thank a couple people from the chat here. We have Dempsey, Daniel, Aldan was floating around, Sven, and Max already brought up a comment from you. And Dempsey, haven't missed anything. We're just starting out, just establishing the scene, if you will. Okay, so as the guy who did your pretty detailed efforts here, like you were posting quotes and screenshots and things like that from the book as you did your read on the Discord, right?
Yeah, yes, I was.
So you were going through it with a pretty fine-tooth comb, almost in a scholarly effort. Would you say that you were doing a scholarly effort?
I'll call myself something of an amateur scholar, sure. Yeah, I'll say right off the bat, we're gonna give this book a lot of grief, and rightfully so. But there are definitely good things about it. Whether or not I would recommend somebody buys it depends on what their interests are. Especially if if you've got an interest in like etymology and words changing stuff, then I would definitely say buy this book because he goes into that a lot, and there's quality stuff in there.
Okay. Well, that's probably as good of a place as any to start this conversation, right? So maybe let's start with the positives. Let's they always say you're supposed to do like a compliment sandwich, right? So like you got to say something good, and then you can say all the bad things, and then you have to finish up and say something good. So what positive things can you say having read this?
So the good stuff is he's clearly drawing from a lot of knowledge that a lot of us in the public just aren't going to have. He's been through Robert Jordan's office, which was like 2 floors of quite the wide array of items, from weapons to books to CDs to skulls. He's had access to the rigging papers.
He has his desk, right?
Well, he did.
I think I've seen an interview of him, and he you know, yeah, like would show people Robert Jordan's desk and like here it is, you know.
Yeah, the desk was given to the Citadel, and he used that desk to write this book. I don't think that desk is in his
Hmm.
office. He doesn't personally have it, but he does have
Okay.
a sword, a katana that Robert Jordan had, and he has the skull of a saber-toothed tiger that Robert Jordan had.
Hmm.
Um,
Interesting.
he also had access to the Rigney papers, which are in some collection at the Citadel somewhere. Uh,
Yep.
so there's a bad side to that, in that he does not make very clear very often when he's pulling from this stuff and when he's sort of speculating. Sometimes he makes it very clear, sometimes he does not. Um, so sometimes he'll say something like, "It seems like this name came from here," so that's a pretty big hint that, like, okay, he's kind of speculating. But sometimes
Okay.
just states things as facts, and because in a couple of places he states things as facts that we just know are false, then we don't
Hmm.
know how much trust to give the things he states that don't have citations. A lot of stuff does have citations, and that's nice. Um,
Okay. So that actually that raises a concern. And this honestly, when I first heard about the book, I was like, yeah, I'll probably get this, right? I didn't know much about him as an author. I know that he's a historian who, you know, teaches, he's a professor at the Citadel, right? Um, and I was like, okay, uh, you know, maybe it's worth reading. I mean, I have both of the other sort of the companions, if you will, the companion, the big white book. Clearly, I have, you know, I have a book collection of all the rest of the Wheel of Time behind me. So you know, on one hand, maybe as a completionist, I was like, yeah, I'll probably get it. And then I like heard some things that I think concerned me a little bit, and one of them was the sort of advertising for the book. Um, let's see. Let me see if I can find the right thing that I wanted to pull up here. Yep, we'll go with that one. Give
I'll
me
just
give
go.
me
I'll
one
go ahead
second
and
here. I'm gonna
mention that
try.
my introduction to
Please
this
do.
book
Yeah.
is, it was just, I kind of knew it was coming and it was released. I didn't know anything about any advertisements beforehand. No idea what I was, what sort of tone there would be or anything. So I came into this
Hmm.
basically blind. So I did not have any preconceived notions that this was going to be garbage or it was going to be great or anything like that.
So I don't want to say preconceived notions about the quality of the book, just the content, right? So I'm pulling this up. This is from the Wheel of Time fandom.com, the wiki, right? Um, and it actually includes what the like initial press releases said about it. So content of the book was listed essentially saying, hey, there's a brand new redrawn map using change requests discovered in Robert Jordan's unpublished notes. That's actually the background of our stream here, and I'll probably show that in full detail later. Also, an alternate scene from an early draft of the Eye of the World, which I think you and I we'll talk about that. We'll get to that one.
Uh,
And this last one here was, I think, the one that like kind of turned me off to it. It said the reveal of Nakomi's true identity,
yeah.
and the reason that I want to bring that up and say that, you know, it kind of turned me off to the idea of getting the book was, for those of you guys playing at home, right? So Nakomi first appeared in Towers of Midnight. Um, And so maybe it's possible that Nakomi was in Robert Jordan's notes, right? That's
Yes.
possible.
I can
But
confirm
Nakomi
that
did not appear.
she originated
Yep.
as a couple of sentences in Robert Jordan's notes.
Yes. And I sort of have always assumed that. And the stream that we did covering the Brandon Sanderson sort of 10-year anniversary stream kind of talked about this as well. That like, okay, Nakomi is probably a character that, you know, the name Nakomi appeared in the notes, right?
No,
But like,
the name is Brandon Sanderson.
imprecise language. The
Yeah,
idea for this Nakomi character might have appeared in the notes,
yes.
but like the way that we see her. Hmm? Please.
Robert Jordan had in his notes just a couple sentences saying this woman appears to Rand. In the book, it says when he's leaving Shia Ghul.
Hmm.
So I'm not sure what that's about. And then she reassures him that the thing he wants to do is the correct thing to do. But there's no context given for this. So I don't know if it's taking Moradin's body and doing whatever, or if it's just going out to roam the world, or if it's a mistake and it meant to say entering Shale Ghul. I don't know. But that's the extent of it.
Okay. So that kind of confirms a little bit what I thought. And hey, Jacob, thanks for tuning in. But that kind of confirms a little bit of my suspicion when I read that as one of the press releases. I was like, what do you mean? Like you're writing this book that purports to be about Robert Jordan and Robert Jordan's books, but one of the like keynote top line things that you're advertising as like the big secret reveal is, my suspicion, and it sounds like you're kind of confirming it, is largely going to be a discussion about a Brandon Sanderson creation.
Yeah, it's basically entirely Brandon Sanderson deciding things this way.
Yeah.
I don't know to blame the book for that. You never know with these marketing things whose decision that was, because I can very easily see a marketing person seeing that in there and going, "Oh, this will sell books if we tell fans we're going to be saying this." Because it's not.
That's valid.
This book is definitely not focused on Brandon Sanderson stuff. There's some in there, but it's appropriate, I think.
Yeah, so that's a valid point. And it didn't make me think like, oh, this book is going to be trash, or oh, this book isn't going to be talking about the Wheel of Time and Robert Jordan's work, right? It's going to be a Brandon Sanderson book. That's not what it was. It was more than I was like, that's got to be a pretty flimsy book if like you can't even list like 3 things that are actually Robert Jordan reveals. Like you're like, hey, we have new art. Like, okay, I mean, sweet. Like it's a nice map. I'll show it to you guys later. We have an early draft of scenes from the Eye of the World, or a scene from the Eye of the World, which is like interesting. And I know we'll have a conversation about the idea of drafts and their canonicity or that sort of thing, right? And then it's like, and this thing that Robert Jordan didn't write, and you're like, wait a second here, like what? This has got to be a pretty light academic work then.
Yeah, the reveal,
if you can't even give me.
The reveal of new canon or pseudo canon information is an interesting tactic for advertising a book that, I mean, right in the title, it's not supposed to be about that. It's origins, it's inspirations, and stuff, and there is a lot of that in there. And depending on how interested you are in that stuff, it's a pretty good book for that. Assuming that what he says is accurate, which sometimes it's hard to tell. But
yeah. All right. Enough of my editorialization. Let's okay. So you were saying for people who like language and sort of roots of words and things like that, you think it's a good book.
Yeah. So the structure.
What other positives?
So the structure. Oh yeah, I'll go on that. So he has sort of a dry sense of humor that shows up at times that I very much enjoy. I don't know how much other people would, but I enjoy that style of humor. He is...
I mean, the Whitecloaks were not very dry. Some of our guests, I think yourself included potentially. The rest of us, definitely not a dry channel, but that might be one of those homophone sort of issues, though.
Yeah, yeah. So there's that. He's got lots of praise for Harriet and everybody else, which I think we would all agree with. There's nothing in there about the show at all. I assume he wrote it before the show was released or something, which is obviously a plus in my book. In
most people, it's most of our viewers' books. Yeah,
it's not a terribly large book. You get through it pretty quickly. I mean, I haven't read a whole lot of books of this nature, but it seems fairly well sourced. There's lots of citations. Although some of it's just publicly available stuff. He recounts the story of shooting down the RPG with a machine gun, that sort of thing. Yeah. What else is good? There's some photos in there that are nice to have, especially since they help address certain early controversies with the Wheel Time TV show.
Okay, well now you have my interest here. So what are the photos?
It's probably not what you're thinking. There are swords like Rand's swords that Robert Jordan specifically commissioned and had a hand in designing and everything. And so there's a photo of one of those in the book, and it's pretty much what we all kind of picture. And above that is a picture of a katana, and below that is a picture of the Black Prince's sword. It's a big, medieval sword, and it's just like, this is exactly what Robert Jordan had in mind, and they just went with a katana. It's
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, I think that was disappointing for a lot of people, and I will, hey, I will give credit. I guess you're saying that the book is not referential to the show, and potentially was, well, given its release time, was almost certainly at least started, if not like pretty much finished, going to the editor, all that kind of stuff, prior to the show coming out. So potentially, not really intentional here, but I will give credit to anything that reinforces the idea that the sword in the show is absolute trash, and is not Rand's sword, is not Tam's sword. I think is maybe the more apt thing to say. Oh man, the one good thing that we have to say about that sword, a little bit of a sort of tangent here, and I hesitate to say this is a good thing because I mean it's probably not going to happen in the show. But the one good thing that could be the case about how terrible that sword is if they stick to the canon at all, we get to see that sword get destroyed
destroyed,
in
obliterated,
the
melted,
way
or
that
whatever.
it should be. Just like absolute, like throw it into the fire, Isildur. Like, so maybe silver linings, guys. That's what you come to the Whitecloaks for. We talk about silver linings, good things the show, you know, may deliver unto the fandom is the
Yeah.
destruction of that shitty sword.
So
Okay.
other good things. There's a lot of information in here that people might be interested in. Not canon stuff or anything like that, but
Mhm.
anecdotes about Harriet and Robert Jordan, which we'll get to some of those, and you will absolutely enjoy that. And
Okay.
some things that some family stories and whatnot. I don't know how much of it to say is exclusive to this book because I know some of it I've already read on his blog
Mm.
from that's on Dragon Mount and stuff like that, but I haven't
Yep.
exhaustively read that sort of stuff, so I don't know what of this is new in this book or not. And I'd say that's probably everything.
All right. Well, hey, short but sweet. Keep them wanting more. We'll these are good. And
That's
you're
probably
right,
that's
Daniel. I apologize to whoever was involved with the making of that sword. Uh, Not for what I said, but for presumably the shame that your parents and family and friends feel for association with you. um, Okay, so you have 9 pages of notes. Shall we dive into it? Should we get
yeah.
into it a little bit?
So I guess I'll just
And
real
then
quick.
for those of you guys who are in the chat, please feel free ask questions. This is well, it sounds he's planned a lot with all his notes. I shooting from the hip, per usual.
Okay, well, I'll just start with some real quick background on the author, Michael Livingston. He was 15 when he discovered The Eye of the World, which is incidentally the same age I was when I discovered Crossroads of Twilight. Um, and he says he read it through high school, college, and grad school, which I initially took to mean he was reading and rereading, but now I'm realizing the books were still coming out when he was going through all that.
Yeah,
So I don't know how much of it,
yeah.
how many times he would have read this stuff. There's a couple little mistakes he makes here and there. Where he's clearly read the series, but a couple little choices of words that he makes. I'm like, you're fuzzy on some of the details of this. Um, and let's see,
Interesting. Like big things or
he
like
describes the Forsaken
a
as
name,
being when he's talking about the Forsaken being released from the seals, being released from the Boar, or however you call it, for being in the sealed in the Dark
Okay.
One's prison. He refers to them as
Yep.
being reborn into the world. And he's not just talking about Osengar and Osengar. So little things like that. I'm like, I don't know that quite makes
And you don't think
sense.
that's just kind of a flowery
It
turn of
might be.
phrase?
It might be, but it seemed kind of odd, little things like that. But on the whole,
Okay.
he's on the whole
I
his
would probably forgive that.
yeah, his
Yeah, it sounds like you're.
description. Well, it's not like it's a major issue. I'm just like I'm wondering how that affects other
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
Generally speaking, I would say he has a good grasp of the strict factual canon. It's his
Okay.
assertions about what things mean and interpretations of certain things that get really off in a few places.
Okay.
Yeah, so he did that. He got a PhD. I assume in Middle Age history or something, because he's written fantasy novels, he's written historical fantasy novels, he's a military historian, he's a historian of the Middle Ages, he's the Secretary General for the United States Commission on Military History. He teaches what seems to be English and literature at the Citadel, which is where Jordan graduated from. And his
That is
Amazon
so
author
I didn't know
description.
that he. Yeah.
His Amazon author description describes him as human conflict analyst or something like that, which is the most PC way I've ever heard of describing somebody who studies war.
Yeah. Okay. I hadn't known that he taught English and literature at the Citadel. I just sort of assumed, based on the books that I've seen that he's written, that he was a history professor.
He might do that. It never says in the book what he teaches. It just keeps calling him a teacher at the Citadel. It mentions one of his classes at one point. I can't remember what the name of it was, but I think it was historical in nature. Something to do with the Middle Ages. It's what he was working on when he got the news that Robert Jordan had died. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So that's that. So the book is broken up into a couple, almost like completely different books. You have one where he's just kind of talking about who Robert Jordan and Harriet are as people, how they met, their early life, real quick bio. Then he goes into the process that Robert Jordan used to write The Wheel of Time, the works he drew on the most. And then there's sort of basically the second half of the book is kind of like a glossary at the end of one of the main Wheel of Time books, but instead of giving encyclopedic information, it's giving information about where these names may have come from, how they thematically relate to those things, if at all, including explaining puns such as Noel, which I pronounce Noel, but is spelled Noal, so you could pronounce it No-all, is, as Jane Farstrider, somebody who clearly has a lot to tell that he knows. That's how, more or less, how he puts it in the book. Things like,
wait, I'm sorry. So he pronounces Noel as No-all. That's how he pronounces that name.
I don't know if he pronounces it that way, but because this is a written book, but he's clearly drawing connection between the spelling and the fact that Noel knows a lot. There's, Fane pretending to be something that he's not.
That's a large stretch, but
which
okay.
No, it's a stronger stretch when you know that his original name was Michael Fane, or Mickle Fane, something like that. His first name coming from the Archangel Michael. So pretending to be good and not being good and that sort of thing. But you are right, that straddles the line between, do we know that this is really what Robert Jordan intended, or is this guesswork and speculation? And it's hard to tell sometimes. Because oftentimes he'll say, okay, this clearly came from this because Robert Jordan explicitly mentioned, for example, the monkey fist, I believe. That's some Chinese character that was partially an inspiration for Matt Cauthon, along with Loki and Odin and various others. Yeah.
So kind of moving on, I guess that's the structure, which is pretty well laid out in all the sort of advertisement material or reviews of this book. That you see that it's got this 2-part structure. I know that some of those glossary entries you've shared with us on the Discord before this.
Yes.
So hopefully we have a couple of choice examples of some of those.
Oh, we do.
But okay, so let's talk about the first half. And you said there's a couple a couple little stories about Robert Jordan or Harriet, maybe.
The foreword to the book is actually written by Harriet, and that sort of tells how the book came to be written a little bit. So as much as we may dislike what's in here, it has more or less the approval of Team Jordan.
So an interesting question would be, Harriet approved and gave him access to the notes and things like that. So the question then would be, did Harriet's sign off occur at just the start of the project,
Yeah,
at the start and the end of the project, throughout the project?
It doesn't say. We know she gave initial permission for the book to be written and made available to sources and whatever.
Okay.
But there's no indication one way or the other, as far as I
Okay.
could tell, that she, signed off on it towards the end. I can't imagine that it wasn't at least run by her, but who knows?
Okay. So probably a good assumption is that it's endorsed.
She was a professional editor for decades, so
so endorsed in more or less its final form is what we should probably assume about it. So.
And I will say that while the things I really dislike are quite noticeable and they really stand out, they are, as a portion of the book, fairly small. Isolated little things here and there. And I do have another good thing to say that I forgot. Early on, he goes way out of his way to say that he's talking about things that are inspiring, things the wheel of time, and it says, okay, these are the roots of the story. The roots, mind you, not the restraints. So very much fighting against this idea of, oh, this is based on this, and therefore it must all match in this way. To say that Luce Theron equals Lucifer in all his manifestations is to tread on somewhat shaky ground. And he says we have to temper our urge to see connections everywhere and what those connections mean when we find them, which I'll say I don't think he always entirely followed his own advice there, but whatever.
That's interesting. He connected Luce Theron with Lucifer, huh? I mean, I guess Lord of the Morning and the Morning Star would be.
Yeah. There's clear
similar sounding names. I don't know. I never really thought that much about
the idea of Lucifer. The idea of Lucifer is, an originally good but then evil thing. I think that's probably pretty well established in Jordan's notes. But like he's saying, he's saying that Luce Theron does not equal Lucifer. He's saying there's some commonalities.
Okay.
He also goes into explain who all the people are behind Team Jordan. So you got Robert Jordan, you got Harriet McDougal, who's his editor and wife. You have Maria Simmons, who what became his assistant in 1996.
Secretary and assistant.
Yeah,
right?
And her role grew and grew and grew until they needed another assistant. And his last name is some sort of Eastern European thing that I'm not sure how to pronounce, but it's Alan Romanchuk or something like that. And he was sort of a research assistant from 2001 onwards. He's also a Vietnam veteran. So there's a very long quote from him about Robert Jordan in there that draws on that shared experience. You got Tom Doherty, who is the publisher and who Tom Maryland is named after. You got Brandon Sanderson, obviously, and then you have Wilson Grooms, who is Jordan's very close cousin. The book says he was referred to by the family as like a fourth brother, and he's the one who handled a lot of communication with the fans during Jordan's illness, put up blog entries and stuff. He's the reason we got the RPG story originally, and then Robert Jordan later posted and clarified things. So yeah, that's the background on the people involved. Just go real quick through the biographies stuff, and where the book came from. So Livingston had been teaching at Citadel for a while. He was introduced to Robert Jordan via another famous author alumnus, and Livingston organized some student awards named in honor of both him and the other author. And then they actually met in person when Robert Jordan attended the ceremony for the first award. And this is where one of my favorite little quotes or it's not a quote, but favorite little anecdotes comes from. Livingston calls out the English department for their support during his speech. And Robert Jordan is sitting in the front row, and it says, he responded by grumbling in the first row that he was an engineering graduate.
Yeah, that sounds right.
I think his engineering background comes through in a few places as well. But certainly not a full-blown disciple of the liberal arts, despite being a published author. Yep. So then in 2008, he spoke during Robert Jordan's induction into the Academy of Authors, and that's what got him noticed by Harriet, and eventually got him, invited to speak at the introduction of the James Rigney exhibit at the Citadel, along with Brandon Sanderson and somebody named David Drake, who I have no idea who that is. And then over the years, he had something of a relationship with Team Jordan, got to tour the office and participate in panels at JordanCon and things like that.
Mm-hmm. He certainly has been floating around for a while, but I don't know. I mean, I think we've kind of established who he is. I don't know if we necessarily want to go too far into the bios of all of these different people and kind of how the book came about. I think, if this is a book that somebody wants to buy, I think, we should leave something for them to actually read.
Yep. Okay.
But I think so. Stuff that I would really like to cover, and that I think some of the chat might want to hear as well, would be, is there? You said that there's some stuff about Jordan in his life, him and Harriet. Maybe is there something that you think is kind of new information that would be good to talk about?
I have a hard time knowing what's new information because I have not made a study of all the the different. I've read through some of the blog stuff, but I don't know what all has been said. But I'll go through a couple of things real quick. So he was born to a father who's like really hardworking. His father was a veteran, a carpenter, a policeman, and a Port Authority employee. And there's an excerpt from Robert Jordan within the book talking about his father, and it almost got me tearing up, both because of just its own nature, but also because it reminds me very, very strongly of my own carpenter father and my relationship with him. It's great to read. So you have that. Then another thing that I identified rather strongly with Robert Jordan is he's talking about how he was going through high school and middle school, high school. He just read books all the time. He taught himself to read at the age of 4 or 3. His brother would read books to him. His brother would read books to him, and he would just kind of follow along. And he just learned to read that way. And eventually his brother figured that out and just started giving him books to keep him quiet and, out of his hair. So he's reading Jules Verne and Mark Twain by the time he's like 5. Like,
crazy.
I can't even fathom that. I wasn't even reading when I was that old. I wasn't reading until my mom mentioned to me that my younger sister read better than I did, and I started reading.
So Dempsey points something out here, which I think is a good callback. It's potentially one of the reasons why the link between Luz Theron and Lucifer, other than names sort of sounding alike, it surprised me a little bit, because he points out here that in the book of Revelations, Jesus refers to himself as the bright morning star. So the idea that like the morning and the morning star and things like that being exclusively sort of associated with Lucifer is actually it's not so clear cut.
Lucifer,
and I think the character of Luz Theron is very messianic.
He has much more in common with Jesus than he does with Lucifer. And I will say that the subject of Lucifer in the Bible is one which I could talk at quite some extent. There's a lot of
but we don't
coming to stuff later. Just suffice to say, it doesn't matter what the truth is there. It sort of matters more what the pop culture of things are that Robert Jordan would be drawing on with his imagery.
And for sure, I think that was the one question I was going to go to was the connection with Lucifer. I feel like generally in pop culture lends itself more towards a sort of Dante's Inferno kind of Lucifer, rather than a sort of religious kind of biblical Lucifer. And then also on top of that, I think really a fundamentally misunderstood version of the Lucifer in Dante's Inferno, which is that he's some sort of aspirational figure versus being a being of like pure selfishness and sort of vanity. That like it's so the Lucifer in Dante's Inferno doesn't actually question the morality of God. He knows that like God is he's doing things right. I just don't like being the number 2. And like I'm not willing to subjugate my own sort of hedonistic passions to
a lot less like
right
Randall Thor and a lot more like Melkor.
So anyway, it's again another sort of caveat, but I think that would be an interesting conversation about which Lucifer Livingston is saying that Luz Theron has relations to. I don't know. Do you have a brief answer on which
He didn't
direction
say
you
much
think he
about that,
could
and
go to?
his only mention of that was when he was saying that we should not say that that Luce Theron equals Lucifer. So I'm not gonna
Okay.
give him much grief
Well, then
about
I
that.
agree with that.
Yeah.
I would not say that. I would agree with that.
Yeah. Uh, so yeah, so he's reading all these books, just massive amounts of books. There were thousands upon thousands of books in his 2-floor office when he died. He said he
Yeah.
attended coast to school because he was smart enough. He got pretty good grades, didn't have to learn how to study, and then he goes to college and gets a really rude awakening, which is pretty much exactly what happened to me. So he goes to Vietnam, does all
Hey, Zach,
Vietnam.
how's it going?
Yeah, he comes back. He has a fall and injures his knee while working as a nuclear engineer, and that gets him in hospital. That's when he decides he's just going to start writing. Goes back to literature, and in about 3 or 4 months, he puts out Warrior of the Altai, which is his first book, which I haven't read. Um, and then that leads to him meeting Harriet, and she was at the time looking for somebody to write Bodice Rippers. And because that was what work was available, he was basically doing a fake it till you make it approach. And they had a
Mm-hmm.
meeting where he gave her a synopsis for a novel that he made up on the way over. And
Yep.
in the book, it says, it's quoting Harriet. It says that she said, the only thing I can remember is that the obligatory sex scene involved a duck.
So I will say, I had not encountered that story until after this book was at least being publicized, if not after it was out. But I do think there's actually a YouTube video of an interview with Harriet where she tells that story. So potentially not exclusive to the book.
Yeah.
I don't know that it was released information that was floating around prior to this. It is a funny story, though. It's a funny story that he shows up and he's the struggling author trying to get work.
Yep.
So there you go.
And
Premium Trial points out that so the story with the duck is in the introduction of Warrior of Altai as well. So there you go. It is out there. But okay. So
after that meeting, he decides to really go into writing. And he quits his nuclear engineering job. And he was told, if you do this, you'll never work for the United States government again. And it speaks to my soul when he replies, could I have that in writing?
That's good. That's
good. Yeah. So there's that. He writes a American Revolution novel basically because he overheard Harriet complain that nobody could write historical fiction in the South Carolina without making it about the Civil War. And of course, then he gets into the stuff we're all familiar with. He starts writing a bunch of Conan books, which incidentally, they name a bunch of those books in this book. And I've never read any Conan books, but one of the books he wrote was Conan the Destroyer. And there is a film adaptation of Conan the Destroyer. And I saw that when I was 11 or 12 or so. And it is one of the most terrible low budget movies I've ever seen. But I will say that the reason for its terribleness seems largely down to film related issues. The damsel in distress seems to be a nepotism hire or something with no acting talent whatsoever, and, low budget effects, that sort of thing.
Robert Jordan is doomed to suffer repeated bad adaptations. It seems like, but yeah,
well, I don't know if it was a bad adaptation, but it was a bad movie.
So I won't talk much about the Conan books. They're actually on my reading list. I'll say a friend of the channel, OBG7, well, formerly OBG70. Mike, he's got a YouTube channel, and he is a huge Conan fan. And actually, that's his story of picking up the first Robert Jordan book was he had been reading all of his Conan books and was looking for more. And the owner of the bookstore was like, "Oh, well, he just wrote this new book. It's not Conan, but you could read that." And it was Eye of the World. So but anyway,
yeah. There's also a bit in there where there's a sort of a self bio that Jordan wrote to include in like a jacket blurb or whatever that never got published. But in it, he describes himself. And he's saying, he's hunter, fisherman, all this stuff. Also describes himself as a libertarian monarchist, which on the one hand seems kind of ridiculous. On the other, it fits absolutely perfectly with the Wheel of Time. Like you
man,
can't argue with that.
There's going to be at least one person in our Discord who's very excited to hear that.
But when I read that, I'm like, that makes so much sense. You have all the sort of sympathy with royalty that's kind of standard to fantasy, and that which I assumed was just because it's kind of standard to fantasy. But you also have things like Nynaeve's quote about charity. You have the Two Rivers ethos in general, and all this. Like, I didn't think you could be a libertarian and a monarchist, but apparently you can.
Well, maybe. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think it's funny. We had that poll on the old our Whitecloaks, right? That allowed people to kind of, hey, what is your political affiliation, background, age, all this kind of stuff. And didn't we have one person who said that they were a monarchist?
There was at least one, yes.
That's funny. Okay, libertarian monarchist. That's good.
That's pretty much all on his bio. The other thing to mention is he grew up. Harriet would describe his upbringing as really poor, but the book points out that Robert Jordan was hesitant to describe his own upbringing in that way, which, again, I identify with that. I grew up, I mean, we got free lunch in school because how poor and on paper we were very poor, but I never felt poor. My parents were very frugal and that sort of thing. But his wife is on the side of the other end of the spectrum. Her dad retired as an admiral, and was a career naval officer. So she went to Harvard. It says Harvard Radcliffe. I don't know what the difference is between that and Harvard. She got an English degree. She got the publishing. Blah blah blah.
Is Radcliffe the school that back when Harvard was an all men's school? Is Radcliffe the one that was the all men's school that was kind of associated? Because I know neither one of those two schools now are all men and all women's schools, or at least Harvard clearly isn't. The other school might be, but I do know that all of those Ivy Leagues back in the day did have, an all girls school and things like that as well. Maybe not all, several of them. It might be Radcliffe. It's I've been up around that part of the country before, but I don't remember the schools and their histories that well. So I guess maybe somebody in the chat might know a better answer there.
That's
okay,
about it for the.
Okay, I gotta ask. So this draft scene, early draft scene from Eye of the World, what can you tell us about it?
Well, I'll open by saying this: the change between this draft and what ended up in the Eye of the World is reminiscent of the change between the first draft and what got released of the first episode of the Wheel of Prime.
Oh man. Well, that raises an interesting question. So we have to first get you on record. Was the first draft of the episode 1 Wheel of Time show worse or better than
well, from my moralistic Christian standpoint, it was clearly worse.
Okay.
But it's not reminiscent in terms of quality. It's reminiscent in terms of how it got more sanitized for its released form. Although in Robert Jordan's case, I don't think sanitization was the reason for it. I think he was improving the characters in the story, and I think it did so. The alternate scene that's in the book is when you don't get a whole lot of context for it, but I'm guessing it's in Barillon, assuming that Barillon was part of the story at this point. It's shortly after Rand and Min meet, and Min just like straight up seduces him pretty quickly after they meet, apparently. And then you get sort of a lot of what ends up in the igloo scene kind of ends up here. His reaction is, I don't know if I can take you with me, but we should get married. But what about Egwene? And she just starts like laughing at his rural naivete. And
okay, well that raises a new question. All right, early draft, Min, getting it on with Rand, which first of all, I mean, nice. Second of all, though, was the dump truck early draft canon?
There's nothing in there. I didn't read super close. I read through kind of quick, but yes, it's.
Then
I
I don't
am
know.
firmly.
I'm not prepared to accept it. I'm not prepared to accept it unless the dump truck is there.
This is gonna anger some people, but I'm firmly of the opinion that the dump trunk is a headcanon that the fans have come up with due to misinterpretations of what the text actually says.
Nope. This is misinformation, guys. This is misinformation. General Matt is just trying to cast a cloud of mystery. The dump truck is real. Okay. I will actually say that, like, I think it's a little column A, little column B, right? I mean, like Robert Jordan was not the writer that I mean, apart from his fixation on bosoms, right? Let's call a spade a spade.
Yep.
Shapely, well sloped, all of the various words. But he didn't spend like that level of detail in describing, like, or I won't say describing.
He liked the subject matter.
Right?
He did not like getting really explicit, which is why he really enjoyed coming down like the hammer of God on other people.
So to an extent, like, okay, do you know that, like, Min was a very attractive lady? Like, yes, you know that. Apparently, she liked to wear very tight breeches, things that sort of flared over the hips. Like, yep, we know that as well. Could you imply that a very attractive woman wearing very tight-fitting sort of, clothing like that might have some assets to highlight? I think that's a fair sort of, thing, assumption
I
to
will
arrive
leave
at.
y'all to those speculations and prefer to focus on other matters.
But I will say it's probably one of the most fun memes about the series, and so I am personally never going to hate on it. I think it's a hilarious part of it. I think if I was casting somebody for this show, knowing the fandom, like, you would have needed to cast someone.
You would have 3D printed Mrs.
Like,
Incredible and had her play the part.
Like, I mean, Brazilian butt lifts would have been involved. I mean, just like those are the types of fan service that I think that people can get behind.
There is a bit of fan service. There's a bit of fan service in this book where the entry in, it's not a glossary, but I don't know what else to call it, for Bella mentions that, the word Bella comes from Belle or whatever, meaning beautiful, and he puts with an exclamation mark, and she is. That's definitely a little bit of fan service, but not the kind that I mind.
So Dempsey says make a poll here about the dump truck. We don't need to make a poll. I mean, it would be 100% in
we
one
can teach
side.
The controversy.
We all know.
Okay,
so
Daniel's
point, though, I think is correct here as well. Like, yeah, it's kind of nice to know that he correctly identified the choices that were available for him. The bodice rippers, right? That he was sort of potentially seeing as an avenue for professional advancement, and he went a different way, right? He did the Robert Frost and took the road that was less traveled. So.
And to Livingston's credit, he spends quite a number of words, several sentences, saying essentially the same thing, that the Min and Rand relationship is far better because of it, and all that sort of thing.
Dempsey, yes, nice. Combining two of my great loves, The Princess Bride and The Wheel of Time.
Yeah,
it's a grade A comment. Okay, so good, that scene. If you want to read the full scene, people have to go and buy the book. I'm kind of surprised that it's not leaked online. Like, I really expected that would be just kind of out there.
Yeah, it's only like, not counting the fact there's a lot of little paragraphs because of dialogue, it's only like 3, 4, 5 paragraphs long.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. So, man, they really sold that. They, like, again, it was like one of the few things, like, a draft scene. Like, is it really a draft scene if it's just like, he removed a few paragraphs from what we got?
It is a scene. It's a self-contained. It's a self-contained scene. for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So a couple notes I got here. You know, Robert Jordan, when he was writing Wheel of Time, he treated it like a job, like 40 hours a week. He'd come in, handle administrative stuff, and then get writing. And they point out the example in here that there's a surviving draft of The Great Hunt that starts with the 25th version of the prologue, the 29th version of Chapter 1, and the 32nd version of Chapter 2, and it still doesn't match the final printed text. So that he worked hard, and then Rafe came and just rafed all over it.
Yeah, that's well. So one thing I want to say here is anyone who doubts the work ethic that he was doing there, right? So here, let's just run down
He
those.
did slow down a bit around the time the slog started, but he was heavily advised to do so. And in his words, you know, it's his publisher told him he needed to slow down. It's like publishers don't do that. They tell you
Well,
you could meet the deadline if you skip some sleep. Like nobody who skipped sleep ever died of cancer. It's
I will say that Brandon Sanderson may have really absorbed a little bit of Robert Jordan when working in his world then. Because if you look here, I mean, again, especially when you consider the size of these works, I mean, they're all 800 pages, right? So you have The Eye of the World, 1990, The Great Hunt, also 1990. Like people forget that the first two books were published within the same year, which admittedly, like, is more likely to happen with the first two books than subsequent books because
you're
you
not
probably
tied.
have the first one done.
You're not
It takes you a
having to
while to
check
shop
everything against your timelines and
yeah, but also like so if you consider that like, hey, I'm writing this series and like I'm working on book 2, maybe even like book 3 or 4, multiple drafts coming through, but like you're shopping the series around a little bit, but still I think it's still impressive. So The Eye of the World, 1990, The Great Hunt, 1990, The Dragon Reborn, 91, The Shadow Rising, 92, Fires of Heaven, 93, Lord of Chaos, 94. So he doesn't go a year without a book until A Crown of Swords. So the first 6 books all come out in 5 years.
That's the book where he says his publicist told him that he needed to change some things.
And then he starts releasing them every other year, basically like clockwork, until you get to and you said this slowing down a little bit with the slog, right? So 96 Crown of Swords, 98 Path of Daggers, 2000 Winter's Heart, and then 2003 Crossroads of Twilight, 2005 Knife of Dreams. Obviously, Knife of Dreams, I think came out after he had already been diagnosed, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And so there's always the question of how much the amyloidosis was affecting him kind of before that. Not really the scope of the conversation here, but still very prolific and impressive work ethic. So
so there's a quote from Jordan that I really like that's included in the books. Is one of my themes is, and it's one reason I wrote the books as fantasies. There is good, there is evil, there is right, there is wrong. It does exist. If you do that in a mainstream novel, you're accused of being judgmental unless you've chosen the right political viewpoint. Which is just great. And that's
interesting.
That's somewhere on the web. That's not exclusive to the book. There's a citation for it, and it's linked to it and everything.
Okay, did Livingston talk much about Robert Jordan's religious upbringing and background?
Okay, I probably should have mentioned this. We're going through the biography stuff. He was born and raised Anglican, which is part of the reason Livingston thinks why you have Elizabeth being referenced so positively as one of the mythical Age of Legends characters or whatever. I can't remember which one is the Queen of All. What was the name of the Queen of All?
Elsbeth.
Elsbeth, yes, that's based on at least one of the Elizabeths and probably the first one. And being an Anglican, that would have been the head of his church. So, but there's also, while no one will deny that he definitely was religious and definitely believed in God and such like that, the details of religion don't seem to matter to him quite as much as you might think. Because when he gets married to Harriet, he converts to Episcopalian and says something along the lines of, all the males in my family convert to the religion of the women they marry, or something like that.
So wait. Was that a Livingston thing saying that he?
No, he's quoting Robert Jordan directly.
Well, one thing I would say is that Anglican and Episcopalian is actually the same. Um, so Episcopalian is just the name of the Anglican
It's
Church in
the
the
English.
United States.
Is it one of those things where
Uh,
you got the American version, but then like the English version came in on its own thing later on
um,
too?
so what I'll say is that, and this is diving far afield from the topic, they don't mean the same thing anymore. So now there is Anglican and Episcopal in the United States today, because the American Anglican and Episcopal Church essentially had a schism, um, 15, 20 years ago, something like that.
Oh, that's it.
But that was
Oh, so maybe I was misreading. Maybe when he was talking about him being Anglican, he was talking about after his marriage when he converted. So I can't. Oh, that's right. Yes. Yep. I'm wrong. Sorry. So yeah, Anglican and Episcopalian are the same. He was raised
yeah.
Baptist. Sorry, got that wrong.
Okay.
He was raised Baptist, born to Catholic nuns because his
Mm-hmm.
mother had a high opinion of the quality of their care.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, raised Baptist, converted to Episcopalian when he got married. Yeah. Then there's a few notes on Brandon Sanderson specific stuff. So there's one thing here about homosexuals, which I'll be honest, I don't think Robert Jordan probably would have been particularly bothered at the inclusion of male homosexuality, but I do personally take issue with Brandon's reasoning for it, which is he added male homosexual relationships to Wheel Time because there are gay men in the real world, and this is the idea of because something's in the real world, it has to be in this fiction. Like if you want to add that, fine, but that's not a good reason. Just because it exists here doesn't mean it needs to exist there. It's like, why aren't you adding Chevy Tahoes?
Yeah, I think that there's a maybe stronger case with that one, and the reason I'll say it is that because Robert Jordan wrote his world as the real world.
I guess you could say that
is our world. So if you're talking about there's this thing that is an aspect of the human condition, and that's in the real world, well, then it also exists in the Wheel of Time's world because they're the same. So that argument is not necessarily wholly wrong. I think that where people have issue with those types of things, and I know some of the people in the chat actually I've discussed this sort of thing with before. People in the Discord have talked about it. I think most of us come on the line of when it comes to things that have, for whatever reason, become sort of political in their, become a little bit polarizing or political or, whatever it is, right, wrong, or otherwise, when you're playing in somebody else's sandbox, you shouldn't include that. And so I think that's probably
that leads to the next Brandon Sanderson quote.
The criticism of Sanderson on that topic, that like, did it bother me as a reader? No, I know it does bother some people as a reader, and that's their choice, and they're not necessarily wrong in thinking, those types of things. But in my mind, the motive, the decision making is the thing that bothers me as the fan, not the inclusion itself. But
that's kind of what I was saying. And there's a quote from a sentence shortly after that, which everybody will recognize as being rather similar to a certain famous Rafe Judkins quote, which is that Brandon Sanderson said he was updating the image of Randland in ways that Brandon suspected Jordan might have done had he lived long enough.
And that's exactly what I mean. That I think that
yeah, at least there's not the hopefully would have, but still, it's
okay, so we talked about this a little bit, and in our Discord just recently actually had a conversation about this. The idea that like it is not a reasonable expectation to think that when one author comes and finishes another author's work, that they're not going to include a part of themselves, a part of their beliefs, a part of their worldview. And so at the end of the day, like, I don't want to be too negative about Sanderson because of things that he chose to include or didn't include.
I'm not generally negative towards Sanderson at all.
I would agree with that. So I don't want to get tied up in that conversation. So
So that's pretty much it for all the people stuff. So then Livingston gets into some of probably what is some of the most meatiest part of his contributions, which is pointing out sort of the main sources that that were used for Wheel of Time. So you got Lord of the Rings, which Jordan is quoted in there
Obviously.
somewhere saying it's his favorite fantasy series, hands down. You've
Yeah.
got La Morte de Arthur, or however you pronounce that, which is essentially the Arthurian legends. And then you have
Yeah.
something I had never heard. I thought I never heard of it, and I've realized recently that I had from a completely different context. A third work called The White Goddess by a man named Graves. And so the White Goddess probably is going to be known to anybody who doesn't know about it because of Wheel of Time stuff. It's some poet, this guy named Graves, went back and basically tried to explain culture and religion and history uh, using as his main evidence linguistic similarities, and coming up with this theory that there was this unifying matriarchal religion in prehistoric times, and that all these stories we have today are sort of branches and fragments of that. So that it is complete and total bunk, and is acknowledged as such by Livingston rather strongly. But doesn't mean Robert Jordan didn't find it interesting in various ways and use it as a source of ideas and stuff. And I think it's probably reasonable to state that Jordan was well aware that this was in a historical sense, this was nonsense, but you could still have interesting ideas come out of that. And yeah, and let's tell you some others. Graves believed women in ancient times rightfully held positions of power, and that we've corrupted that with men being in charge, or something like that. And then this is Livingston speaking. Jordan had lived through 2 tours in Vietnam. Before the war, he'd played football at Clemson, and after the war, he'd taken his degree at the then all-male Citadel, which at the time remained defiantly proud of its patriarchal traditions. He, too, knew the potential madness of a world dominated by men. Which is...
What? Okay.
Vietnam I get. But playing football at Clemson...
So everyone knows that it's a universal truth that football players don't think very highly of men. That's something that's well documented. They generally think that we shouldn't have male sports or other things like that. The thing that I want to highlight though is to me that's a non sequitur when you're talking about the Wheel of Time, because okay, what world dominated by men exists in the Wheel of Time? None. And the world that is dominated by women is not a great world.
Yeah,
so he's neither showing us a world dominated by men and showing us the flaws of that, and he's also not showing us a world dominated by women and the virtues of that.
Yeah,
and in fact is arguing that if anything, I think he's really just arguing that a world dominated by anyone is not a great thing.
Yeah.
So it's
Livingston,
just such a weird...
Yeah, Livingston has some other verbiage elsewhere where he's talking about, how with the gender stuff, Jordan is trying to rectify historical wrongs. Or no, because the quotes he used are something like, Jordan talked about how, I started to think, what would a matriarchal world look like? And, he starts portraying that.
Is that
he's not prescribing this as a solution to the world's ills. He's just saying, okay, it's going to be different in some ways. It's going to be the same in the others, and it's going to be worse in some ways and better in some others. And it's
touching back just briefly here. OBG 70 is here, talking about the Lucifer, Luz Theron, Lightbringer, Lord of the Morning, all that stuff. We did talk about that a little bit. Dempsey brought up, and I think this is worth noting, that Lucifer, well, less important, that part of it. The idea that Jesus is actually also referred to as the morning star and things like that. So It's not as clear cut. You talked a little bit about the sort of Dante's Inferno kind of Lucifer, but I do think you're right here that the thousands of years of telephone game could have gotten us the name Lucifer from Luz or Luz Theron or something like that. So I'm not against the idea, I think that it's an interesting conversation to have, and
And
potentially not
again,
one.
we're really far afield of Livingston, because Livingston was
Yes.
not at all
Yeah.
saying that Lucifer and Luz
Yeah.
Theron are the same. He was saying quite the opposite.
Yeah. So anyway, it is an interesting conversation. I think that's one of the great things about the world of the Wheel of Time, which is that not anything is just one thing. He's
Yes.
pulling from all of these different influences and motivations and
Yes.
sort of historical allegories and things like that, which hopefully we'll get into here in a little bit on some of those
Yeah,
things
that's
that
my
you're.
next section, is a bunch of that stuff.
Oh well. Then before we move on, I do have to. We do have to just kind of finish the conversation we were having then. And please, in the chat, looks like we have 18 people watching this. So if anyone's got any questions about the stuff we've talked about so far, put them in. We'll highlight them up before we move on. Okay, so that sort of, I think, kind of politically motivated reasoning about the
Yes.
books is.
And
I don't
note
know.
here,
What do you think of him?
note
Him
here,
getting in.
he based that entire thing on the things, the experiences that Robert Jordan had in life. He didn't base that on anything Robert Jordan ever said or wrote, other than
Yes.
he thought, what if a world was run by women? And he didn't give any sources for that. He's taking these things that definitely happened and then putting his own little spin on it, which is sort of a motivated reasoning and wishful thinking, if assuming that Livingston subscribes to that worldview, which I think is probably a pretty safe bet.
Yeah.
Um,
So the question there becomes really like, okay, in my mind, reading something like that would lose a lot of credibility for the book for me,
yes,
because I'd be saying, okay, well, you clearly are willing to basically insert your own interpretation of the story as Robert Jordan's inspiration
yes.
for the story, which is not that. Okay, that always reminds me, just kind of literary criticism in general, and some of the people in the
Of
chat, or you
the
might want to
stereotypical
stereotype
English
this.
teacher saying, "What does the blue
Yes,
curtains mean?" Yes,
exactly. And that was something that always really annoyed me with like literature classes.
yes,
And so maybe him
yes,
being a literature professor would make a lot of sense.
yes,
Where like, yeah, here's a, a paragraph or a page from the Scarlet Letter or this poem or, whatever it is, and
yes,
like, break down all of the literary references and allegories and the symbolism and like what's going on here. And I've toyed with doing some writing. I know a lot of people who do a lot of reading eventually do some writing, either short stories or otherwise. And I feel like, maybe it's just that these authors who get published and do these great works are really a totally different class of writer and sort of scholar than the rest of us. Or I think that you're informed by osmosis through the culture that you live in and the history and the things that you read and influence you. You don't actually go about to construct
yes,
these little tiny details into your story. You don't do the work that the literature class then does on the backside. And the mistake is thinking that because I spent 30 minutes breaking apart this paragraph and looking for all of the things in it, that you spent 30 minutes on this paragraph doing that.
yeah,
I don't think that's true.
yeah.
So anyway, it just something that your conversation kind of inspired me
Yeah.
to sort of think through.
Yeah, I'll say that there is something to be said for, people can put things in unconsciously or things as the result of their culture or whatever, but most of the
Mhm.
time that stuff seems to me like literature professors and students just looking for meaning where there really isn't
Job
necessarily
security,
anything.
literature
Yeah.
professors looking for job security. I think
Yeah.
where I would say that sort of thought that I had ends is in names of things, right?
Yeah.
So the etymology of character and place names in books,
Etymology.
I think. Sorry, etymology is
Yep.
bugs and etymology. Thank you. Hey, you know what? I've said dumber things on a live stream before. Um, so the etymology. Thank you for correcting me. See, we bring on smart guests. The etymology of those
I've
names, I
made the
think,
same mistake
actually
several
is.
times.
Yeah, I think that is actually really important and is something that I believe the author spends time on, because I think, again, using myself as sort of an example, like it's a thing that I spend time on. Like picking a character name is a conscious choice. Picking like word, like picking your descriptive words just sort of flows, I think, for most people. So I think there's a difference to be made there. Anyway, and it sounds like that's maybe a good segue into the stuff you wanted to talk about next. Is that?
Yes, I've got a section here of just stuff that's I think has been confirmed beyond reasonable doubt. Some of it's absolutely certain. Some of it's not 100% certain based on what I can see, but
Okay.
but I think it's reasonable. So you got little things. You got the Tanchico skull, inspired by the saber-tooth tiger skull, which I always thought was more of an elephant, but that saber-tooth tiger makes sense too. And I think if it was an elephant, they probably would have called that out as being similar to Shreddit.
This would it, yeah.
Heron marked blades are not katanas. Like I said before, Robert Jordan commissioned some, and there's a photo of one of them in this book, and it is not it has clear katana influences, but it is not a katana.
Can you share the photo of the commissioned sword in any way? Is that a thing you
it will
could
not
do?
be a high quality photo, but I can just take a picture of it and send it to you on the Discord. How about that? Oh, I could screen share, can I? Okay.
You can, if you have a digital copy of it, then you can.
I'm just taking a photo right now. There, I've taken the photo.
Oh, okay.
It'll go to my cloud in a second, and then I could just share it. Let me
Okay. If you can figure it out, great. If not, have you seen?
I'll move on while we wait for that to sync up. But
yeah.
So then you have Matt being a mixture of Odin, Loki, Heimdall, Coyote, Anubis, Math, which is a Celtic figure that I wasn't familiar with. The Monkey King, not the Monkey Fist. I said Monkey Fist earlier. It's the Monkey King. It's another...
Yeah, I knew the character that you were.
Yeah.
You were.
And then I don't know anything about it. Then you got Francis Marion, known as the Swamp Fox, who I believe was also the inspiration for the Patriot, right?
Yes, yeah, the Mel Gibson, the Patriot, yeah. I think there's a couple other there's
probably others as well.
Military history things. The one that I've always thought, and I don't know if this is actually included in the book there. Does it do anything about the inspiration or sort of meaning or link, I guess, for how am I? Iturralde. In my mind, Iturralde was always a Robert E. Lee sort of.
There was Gareth Bryn was at least called out as being somewhat inspired by the way Livingston worded it. Was very particular what he knew of the reputation of General Robert E. Lee.
So I can actually see that. That's not. I always thought Iturralde, because of the way he fought his campaign, digging trenches and things like that, was Robert E. Lee was sometimes called the. I think they actually called him the Queen instead of the King as a derogatory in the North, but he was the Queen of Spades because of all the spades and trenching tools. This I can see Gareth Bryn, especially as a Southerner. As a Southerner, I could see the noble sort of.
Gentile.
That makes sense.
Lord.
Yeah.
Rodel Altorada is just called out as being inspired by Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, the Spanish hero known as El Cid. And the Citadel is also known as El Cid.
Okay.
Both men are renowned warriors and leaders of men, considered fair-minded, loyal, and strong.
Okay. All right. Sorry, I distracted you there talking about Iturralde. You were going on about things that we can feel confident as confirmed.
Yes.
So
you have the seven seals on the Dark One's prison, deriving from the seven seals from Revelation. Also, they were initially supposed to be seven eyes of the world, each of which was associated with a seal. And the initial concept behind the red-veiled Aiel is that they would be the Dark One's hit squads sent out to destroy the seals at the various eyes of the world, but that eventually got dropped, and they became, his ace in the hole for the last battle.
Interesting. That is the seven eyes of the world would have been rather interesting. I feel like
Yeah,
that must have been abandoned fairly early
yeah, I think so.
because I mean the eye of the world is the name. That would be a
I
strange name to
Well,
pick if
I
it
could
was not
easily see that
singular.
because you could easily have it be like the Bells of Awakening in Dark Souls. Like there's the Eye of the World. They get there and then they learn that there's six others and
Okay,
or something like that. But I suspect it
sure.
was probably abandoned pretty early on. But this also means that he had the idea for the Red Veiled Aiel probably when he's writing the
That was
Eye or the Great Hunt
that was my next point. Is like, wow, we don't see the red veiled Aiel
until
until what, Knife of
Sanderson books,
Dreams?
right? I don't think we even see it till Sanderson books. I
Maybe
think
you don't think that we see him in Knife of Dreams? It,
is that when you have the
my
Slayer pause?
recollection would be that it was either Knife of Dreams or Tower of Midnight was the
Maybe.
first time. So I'll give you that maybe that was a Sanderson thing that taken from the notes. Okay.
I'm not saying it's a Sanderson thing. I'm saying I don't think we saw it till Sanderson books, but it might have been Knife of Dreams
Yes.
in the prologue or
We're
epilogue
saying
or
the same
something.
thing. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. So you had Althur, originally Althur with a Althor, originally Althur with a U.
Okay.
Derives from both Arthur and Thor, obviously.
Yeah.
Then you also have the AB Ab is Welsh meaning son of, and Arabic
Mhm.
Al meaning the.
Yeah.
Aes Sedai derives from AOC, Irish fairies, which
Mhm.
were referred to as Aes Sid in The White Goddess by Graves.
Mhm.
Moraine, originally Morgaine, derives from Morgan Le Fay and the Morai of Greek
Yeah.
myth. You got the Green Man is the Green Knight. I tried to skip a lot of the ones that people already know really well, but Sangreal derives
Yeah.
from the Sangreal, which is the Holy Grail. For a while,
Yes.
the Angreal were going to be called Chris, after the Javanese Chris dagger. And while Livingston doesn't point
Hmm.
this out, I obviously am seeing yet
Dune.
another connection with Dune here.
Wait, how could you think the word Chris and be a sort of fantasy fiction scholar in any way and not
Well,
think immediately a Chris
well,
knife?
he
Like
may have thought of
how?
it, and there could just be. I think the wording of this was that the Javanese Chris dagger is called out in Jordan's notes, so it could be that Herbert and Jordan are drawing from the same source here and not one from the other. Um, who knows?
But okay,
Because the
I mean,
Javanese Chris knife.
I'm willing to
Well,
say that,
hold up. The Javanese
right?
Chris knife also has a lot of religious spiritual significance, much like the Chris knife. So I think we could pretty confidently say Herbert drew from that.
Yeah, but I'm willing to say that so to use Robert Jordan as a sort of scientist, right? To use his background here with like contemporaneous kind of discovery or invention. So if two people simultaneously and separately come up with the same conclusion, invention, discovery, whatever, it's very possible that they both observed the same thing, created a hypothesis, tested their hypothesis, and mostly concurrently came to the correct conclusion, right? However,
Especially if you know that
Herbert,
one of those people, the one that came later, happened to be in that general region of the world
yeah,
when.
um, I mean, the Chris knife would have been a thing that Robert Jordan was aware of writing this. I mean,
Yeah,
like,
he had to be aware of Dune. Absolutely, yeah.
let me confirm when Dune was published.
Like
I mean,
it wasn't the 40s, was it? I think it was a little later than that.
I think it was way a long
I
time
think
ago, 1965,
yeah,
right?
65. Okay.
So yeah, so to argue that Robert Jordan was
Yeah, he
thinking
had to have
of
been aware of
a
that.
Middle Eastern kind of ceremonial Chris dagger in a vacuum, not
Javanese, Javanese. We're talking about Indonesia.
Japanese. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you. Um, yeah, that just no. Like you can say that hey, he talked about this thing, but you have to, like, how do you not put in the Dune reference there? I think OBG70 is maybe right here.
I do
Yeah.
want to say, like,
Okay.
even if it had nothing to do with Jordan using that word, you gotta
Yeah.
acknowledge that, because that's
Yes.
the only thing I can think of is does Livingston just not know Dune well enough to know about Chris Knives? Like, that doesn't
I mean,
seem
yeah,
like
at
it
a
would be the
certain point,
case, but
at a certain point, you'd have to mention the Dune reference, if only to say that from Robert Jordan's notes, he was actually influenced by this real world Chris Knife
and
that
he
was
does
a
that.
separate and distinct influence.
Livingston does that in many other places. Like the similarity between these
Yeah.
two names is obvious, but from Jordan's notes, he was actually referring to this.
All right, I think it's important then that we say it here first. Livingston has never read Dune. Okay. Which I know there's at least one other point that you think that he missed a Dune reference, right?
You talking about Jamara?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, I don't think he meant.
we've-
I don't think he ever mentioned Dune there either. Yeah.
So yeah, Livingston's never read Dune. Livingston, if you're watching this, come
Well,
tell us we're
in
wrong.
fairness, I think the Jamara entry was just explaining the origin of the word. And the word Jamara doesn't have any relation to Dune, I don't think. Just the creature it describes.
We're still gonna say that it is what it is.
Yeah, I'm gonna stand by my opinion that the man writing a story where a messianic figure goes to the desert and comes back with a massive army to conquer and has to deal with some monstrous worms and finds a wife amongst those desert people is aware of Dune pretty strongly and deals with manipulative, long-lived women sort of controlling things from behind the scenes, so on and so forth.
No, that doesn't sound familiar. I'm not actually. None of that's making any connections for me.
Using prophecy to achieve ends.
Yeah. So what else? What else do we have other than
Cauthon? Cauthon Fane went through a couple of different iterations of his name, and he was originally Eward White.
Wow, that's a large.
Yeah, which one or two of the more controversial Whitecloaks members might have some interesting literature professor interpretations of abandoning the last name White for this particular character. Which I do not subscribe to, but that occurred to me as an amusing possibility that some people might read into that.
not gonna go there, but I will say the character of Paddon Fane is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So what were the other names that he sort of developed? Are there other ones?
The only ones I can remember are Eward White and Michael Fane. I don't know how to pronounce it. It's spelled Mikal. I would call it Michael, but I'm just kind of guessing. Which I think is how David's wife, the daughter of Saul, was spelled. Okay. But Livingston was drawing a connection from the Archangel Michael, and I can't remember if that was confirmed with references to the notes or not. So here I've got the account of the deleted scene from the test manuscript. So Min seduces Rand pretty much as soon as they meet. So Watt has a bit of an ongoing history of sex scenes getting a bit sanitized as they move towards production. Note that in this version, Rand is still the mostly innocent rural youth. So it's not him just going at it in a common room and clearly not doing it for the first time. And he has pretty much all the same reactions he had with the igloo.
So was there a pocket strawberry involved?
I don't know what that means. I don't want to know.
From that stupid scene in the show where he pulls out a berry from his pocket.
I didn't read that scene that close. I read it up to know what was going on, and I'm like, I'm done with that. In fact, Min is somewhat surprised by how innocent Rand is. She goes, doesn't any farm girl ever take a guy for rolling the hay where you're from? And Rand's response further reinforces the conservative nature of the two rivers, which is like he acknowledges that there are lots of people who, they probably didn't quite wait until marriage, but that this is something else entirely. He not only does he not do this sort of thing, he's never heard or has any suspicion that others in the Two Rivers would do this sort of thing, which is not the same as saying that it doesn't happen at all. Obviously, he wouldn't necessarily be aware,
So,
but
yeah, we know from the actual book as published, right, that those
yes,
types of things did happen in the Two Rivers, because there's a specific
there's one. Yeah,
example
yes,
of a couple who
yeah.
I think the
But
description is that they didn't sit very comfortably until, even
they've been
weeks
married a
after the
month.
wedding.
They've been married a month. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But even that, I think there's a. I mean, that even that might have fallen under the category of people. I came up with this wording: jumping the gun a bit before jumping the broom.
Okay.
So I have a little subnote. Any reader will naturally want to compare this with Wheel of Prime Pilot's first episode's common room travesty. Fortunately,
Yeah.
Michael Livingston does this for us unintentionally. Instead of a sudden sexual fling, the relationship between Min and Rand was instead allowed the room to grow into a far richer, far more rewarding way. So
Yeah, I would bet that season 2 of the Wheel of Time is going to have even more, even more romantic scenes, if you want to call it romantic, than season 1. So I don't think that it's going to be allowed to develop in that way. But
yeah,
hey, good. At least Livingston is actually acknowledging that there's some beneficial work done to the story by allowing these innocent kids to actually grow up, versus, because honestly, that's one of the great things about the story and the characters, is that these characters are so naive and innocent and have such a weight of responsibility placed on them.
And that they're able to bear that because of the strength of their upbringing and their,
which is one of the ultimate kind of ultimate sort of theses of the book, right? The value of good values, I guess,
and good parenting.
But yeah, especially good parenting, and particularly strong fathers.
Yes.
The importance of father figures, both to male and female characters. We see this obviously with Rand. We see this with Perrin as well. We see it with Matt.
We see it with one of the best candidates. One of the best candidates for a girl boss character. You got Nynaeve. Her mother isn't even mentioned, but her father is.
Yep.
Oh, man.
But also, we actually see it happening with Berlane, right? With Ruark as a stand-in father figure. So we actually see in the transformation of a character on both the male and female side of the equation, when a strong father figure comes into a character's life, the change that makes. So
Tom and Elaine, yeah.
Yeah, we're potentially getting far afield here again. We'll focus back on the book, guys.
So the next comment you will enjoy quite a bit, I think. So it confirms that the three that I'll refer to as dragon riders are inspired by the triple goddess concept from the White Goddess, personified as maiden, nymph, and hag. Now I put that as Avienda, Elaine, and Min, respectively. So, in a sense, one could argue that Min was cast closer to the original source material. And let me backtrack a bit by saying I don't have issue with the way that actress looks. A lot of people go, "Oh, she's so ugly, she's ancient," and I'm like, I don't subscribe to that. But she was very, very clearly not age appropriate for Min.
Yeah, so
she is a horrific choice of casting for that character.
I think honestly, they took the boyish haircut and things like that way too far. It's like, yeah, boyish for like a fantasy setting, right? Not like, she didn't need
it's cut short.
Shave,
like it's cut short. Yes.
Yeah. So she didn't need a side shave. The weird fixation with giving characters tattoos, we understand that is a somewhat shocking aspect of certain cultures that we will see in the story as the story branches out and develops. So having like all of these Aes Sedai and Min and all these other characters with just big chest tattoos and arm tattoos and neck tattoos and things like that.
You can have one or two Aes Sedai with sea folk tattoos. That works just fine, but you just give it to random people. It doesn't.
Yeah, it would have to be the one or two, but yeah.
Yeah.
But the issue that I take with that last statement, to circle back to Livingston and your comment, is, let's be honest here. Min, who can see the future, is clearly
Yeah.
the nymph, right? So you have the maiden, the nymph, and Elaine is the hag, based on personality only. I mean, she's a very attractive hag.
Which, on a completely
Yeah.
unrelated note, I once downloaded a mod for Skyrim that was
Okay.
higher quality textures, and for some reason the hag ravens ended up looking like young women essentially. I was like, that's an interesting choice.
um. Okay. What else? What else do you think we kind of need to
So
cover when talking about
there's
this book?
so you have Suldam. The Dom part of that is confirmed to derive from BDSM.
Yeah.
Uh, Aemon Alcar Althorin is a nod to Thorin Oakenshield, which is King Aemon from the Methrin story.
Yep. Yep.
Agomar Jagad has a jagged face. There wasn't a
What?
citation. Agomar Jagad has a jagged, hard, angular face. That was not given a citation, but when the way he worded that, I think that's coming from the notes.
Okay.
Here's a direct quote from Robert Jordan. Physically, most Aiel are tall, with blonde or reddish hair and blue or blue-gray eyes, most common. So, make of that what you will. Here's one where I personally see a connection, and Livingston calls it out, but he doesn't give a citation from the notes. And the way he says it makes me think it's just him speculating, which is that the name Al-Salam, king of Eredamon,
Yep. Mhm.
you're a girl.
Yeah. Thanks, Lee. Fact check true. That's these are true things.
Also, the name Al-Salam is very reminiscent of Absalom, the son of David, who rebelled against him in the Old Testament.
Yep.
Um, but he just
You're saying
says
he doesn't? He
he
doesn't make
says
that connection?
he does. Livingston makes that connection. He
Okay.
says Al-Salam echoes Absalom and goes on about that, but he doesn't make it clear if that came from the notes or not.
Okay.
Ashaman
Yeah,
derives from Asha.
I can see what you mean about how it would be nice if, if he clearly, almost like a kind of like a red text thing, right?
Yeah.
Like if he
Yes.
had done something in the glossary that just very clearly highlighted, like, these are the things that are 100%, like Robert Jordan said, this is the inspiration for this, or this is the sort of historical, cultural, linguistic lineage of this. And then, hey, this is me looking at the context of all the other notes and the other things that he's pulling from, and clearly thinking, well, he has a few names that go with this, legend, and this person's name matches this other character from this legend, so it's likely that it was a linguistic link, right? Like sort of a cousin, right?
Yeah.
That would have been a valuable thing to add, I feel like, if you're making this type of book.
And that's the thing, is he spans that spectrum. Sometimes he gives direct sources and quotes. Sometimes he's very clear that he's speculating, and sometimes he says things like, "The name echoes blah 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 blah." Okay, what does that
See,
mean?
that implies to me that if he is going through there and citing some things but not everything, that implies to me that's like, okay, well, anything not cited is just you making it up then.
Or it could be
Right?
something he read in Robert Jordan's notes and didn't make enough of a note up to find later on, and so he remembered it but couldn't cite it directly. You just never know.
Gosh, that would be, I mean, that would be so disappointing.
Hmm.
As for that to be a mistake that I wouldn't feel sorry about making in characterization of his work. It's like, all right, if you're a published historian and your defense is like, well, it's in there, I just forgot to take notes on it and couldn't be bothered to go back and like find the location and cite it properly, my answer would be like, I mean, you're the professional, man. Like,
And
it's like,
there's something I don't know quite how to determine the quality of or what I think of this. He later on he's thanking some people. I think this is in like the little blurb afterward.
Mhm.
but it implies that he was going through like Dragonmount and wikis and stuff as
Ugh.
part of his research. And charitably, we would say that's getting starting points. Uncharitably, we would say that that's taking fan theories as almost fact. And
Yeah,
you can't really
my
tell.
issue would be that, almost anyone who's a serious kind of fan of the series has probably experienced what I experienced with reading the entry to the sort of the Red Aja on the fan wiki, right? That like you go through, if you're sufficiently versed in the subject matter, and you go through and read some of those websites, read Dragonmount, read the fan wiki, read some of those things, you will find like, well, this is just wrong. Like there's
Yeah.
a thing here that somebody put on this website, and it either sometimes doesn't have a source, or sometimes does have a source, and in either of those cases you're like, that's just wrong.
It's not a knock against those
And
websites. That's the nature of the beast with wikis. But
yes,
yeah,
yes. And so the unfortunate thing there is that there's those types of honest, well-meant factual mistakes that are inherent to the format, right?
hmm
And then there are the more nefarious mistakes, which
yes,
are actually not mistakes at all. The ones where people go in with motivated reasoning and they editorialize. And the example of this that the example of this that I can best think of, and I could go and quickly here try and find it, but I'll just say that there is one of those websites. I think it's the Wheel of Time fandom wiki. Um, has in the Pillow Friends
oh, of
section
course,
has a list of pillow friends from the book. It's like, here's all the pillow friends that we like, pillow friend confirmed, right? And one of them is Elaine and Avienda.
I hate that one.
and
So the
and
Min's dump truck
and
is
it's
fun. Elaine and Avienda is just a like. Are you not
yes,
reading the same books that I am? They took baths
yes,
together.
and
Well, Rand and Matt literally took baths together in the exact same
yep,
way that they did in the very
yeah.
first book, and nobody's shipping those two.
And the thing is, like, if you pull the thread on those, and like that one, I believe from my recollection, it had a citation. It said like this chapter of whatever, and you can go read it, and you're like, there's no there. Like
Yeah.
this is somebody who, you know,
It,
who wants desperately for a thing to be a thing.
yeah.
And
And
Lee Erickson,
in
Lee
fairness, we
pointed
will
this out
acknowledge
correctly.
that Elaine and Avienda did sleep in the same bed, but
Sure, but
that's
that
not.
doesn't mean
Yeah,
anything.
yeah,
um, Siblings sometimes share beds, and
yeah.
Lee Erickson, I think, making the part. First sisters generally not pillow friends. For
Yes,
you have to recall
yes.
here, for Avienda, maybe not for Elaine, right? You could say Elaine, she's not Aiel. Avienda, though, would treat their bond
Like,
as,
in,
we are
yeah,
literal blood sisters,
yes.
right? And so, unless your point is that Robert Jordan was writing an incestuous relationship,
Which he came
uh,
close to with Rand and Elaine, but he avoided.
yeah, he avoided. They're really not related at all.
Yes, yes, yes.
But anyway, the point is that those types of things are in the wikis. They are on the websites, and if you read those, it's like, look, this is clearly somebody who has a preconceived notion about something in the books that they, because of whatever they have going on in their mind, like they inserted into the
Yeah.
story, and then are cherry picking information to support.
M-
So if that's a source that you use as a scholar, like it's gonna be flawed foundationally.
Yeah.
So
And then it was my personal funnest experience with that. It wasn't in the wiki, but there were Reddit comments of a fairly new guy coming along asking some questions, and people are confidently asserting to him that Bane and Shiad are married to each other. And I'm like, did it say like right when they met Avienda and them that they were married to each other? Like, it literally says they're married to the spear, and then Bane goes and explains what that means. Like, it's
mhm.
how do you
Yeah.
not get this?
Now the Bane and Chad one, you could maybe say that they at least would have been willing to have that type of relationship or whatever, because there's the whole thing about Gaul, like he'd have to accept both of them and he only wants one of them,
Well, and another interpretation
so
somebody had in that same thread was that they were not interested in men, which we just know is false, because because they were reading into the way that that Matt interacted with them. Because the Aielman thought it was funny that he was trying to get their attention, they interpreted that to mean that, oh, these are lesbians, and the Aielman know it. And like, no, that's not it.
We're far
Yeah.
afield again here, I think.
Yeah.
But good conversations.
Yeah. So Ashaman derives from Asha, from Zoroastrian theology, which means something like natural truth, and man is just man. That I have a bit here about Nakomi, female character who encourages Rand as he leaves Shia Ghul. Brandon Sanderson chose the name, and chose the whole light version of Shaidar Haran, Jen Aiel, all that. Pretty much everything about Nakomi is Brandon Sanderson canon.
Do they give us what Robert Jordan actually said about Nakomi? The one or two lines. Do we
there's
that?
There's I have the page number here, so let me just look it up. It's page 180.
Because while you're looking that up, I think that would be an interesting conversation maybe to end on.
An unknown woman says to Rand, "Yes, that's good. That's what you need to do." She hurries off as he's leaving Shia Ghul, but that's
okay. That's a lot of lifts for that plate. That's Brandon Sanderson made a pretty good mountain out of that.
We haven't quite made it to my selected Livingston nonsense section.
Okay, all right. Let's do selective Livingston nonsense, and then let's do how many stars you would give it.
Okay.
And whether or not you'd recommend a buy, and then let's end there before we get past the 2 hour mark again.
Okay. Just before that, I have one note that's definitely speculation, that's not confirmed, is that Layla Dern is inspired by Laura Dern, which I thought made for some interesting parallels between liking somebody earlier on in your childhood, and then as things developed later on, not being quite so interested in.
Okay, so Layla Dern,
which is the girl that Perrin
in the show.
Well, in the books, it's the girl that Perrin is interested in, and she's interested in him, and nothing happens. And then later on, he finds her when they come back to the Two Rivers, and she's married, she has a kid, and she's gained a lot of weight. And then
it was. Well, she's now she's a good wife, so she's had a bunch of kids, and a stout good wife, that's nothing wrong with that. Okay.
If you're of the opinion that Robert Jordan likes women on the heavy side, which maybe he does, you do have to reconcile that with Perrin's reaction to her gaining weight.
Well, we don't have to go there, I don't think. But so Layla is inspired by Laura Dern, as in like the actress?
Yes, as in the actress that we all probably loved as kids because she was in Jurassic Park. And then we became adults and The Last Jedi came out, and we thought, maybe not so much.
Gosh, that's unintentionally hilarious, and I love it.
Okay, so now for the actual Livingston nonsense. Livingston states as fact, without giving any source, that Amoresu is the female champion of the light and a counterpart to the dragon. I've heard this everywhere. I do not know where this originally comes from. It is not in the Wheel of Time. It's not in the Companion. She's not even mentioned in the index of the Big White Book. The extent of her companion entry is that she's a hero of the Horn, basically. Her mentions in the Wheel of Time are several times that she's a hero of the Horn, and then she's the one who's kind of getting onto Matt for his attitude towards Rand after the Horn is blown at the last battle. And that's it.
Yeah. So I want to say that is again, motivated reasoning. That's a fan theory that has existed for a long time. Some of the people in the chat may have some more insight onto this.
Yeah, every time I see it mentioned, it's mentioned like it's fact. I don't understand
So
that.
what I will say is that there are some Robert Jordan Q&A answers
Okay.
that are somewhat related to this, but I think again, this is the motivated reasoning versus what he actually says. So if you want to go on to some other stuff, I'll see if I can't find the actual wording here while we're going here.
Okay, there's a little bit of rebirth, not important. So Livingston, in my opinion, reads far too much into the simplification of the yin-yang symbol into the Aes Sedai symbol. Quote, the original Aes Sedai symbol, in other words, because it's missing the dots, sorry, is twice broken. Not only has the unified signal been split into two distinct halves, but those two halves are wrongly presented as purified and independent forms rather than interdependent dynamic concepts, which that last part, sure. But he's saying that, you know, the lack of the dots indicates that the Aes Sedai is even more broken. I think this is very much literature professor or English professor just reading stuff into. My gut feeling would be that, you know, Robert Jordan is he just wants to, you know, change things up a bit, and you get the simpler graphic, and it makes it easier to do things with it. And I don't know. I can't be certain of that, but then and then he goes on to deny that the omission of the dots was a mistake. He's saying Robert Jordan did just like forget that the dots were part of the symbol, which I think we would all agree with. But he does it in a really bizarre way. He says, this might seem like a mere oversight, which seems to me to sort of be assuming. I don't know. It's hard to say. On page 70, Michael Livingston acknowledged the gender binary in Watton, goes over Sidar and Sidene and all this, but has the audacity to say, as the story unfolds, however, this is undercut by at least one character who finds themselves moved from one biological sex to another without their gendered power changing. These abilities are thus tied to an individual's internal gender identity rather than their external biological identity, though the rarity of such characters strongly implies that in the Wheel of Time it is typical for gender identity to match biological identity. Which is just nonsense. It's so in order for that to be true, if it's about internal identity, then what he would have to be saying is that no channeler has basically ever been born with a mismatched gender identity, which would imply it just doesn't exist in Wheel of Time, which seems kind of run counter to what he's trying to go for here. It just doesn't make any sense. Further on, he writes, I have little doubt that if Jordan were writing today, he would work to create a world that felt more inclusive to non-binary readers. He would also, I think, do even more to negotiate what is now more widely, this is his word, known about the complex and constructed relationships between biological sex, gender identity, and sexual identity. He would do this, I suspect, because the Wheel of Time was, in its origination, this is what I was referring to earlier, absolutely intended to be corrective of the harms faced by those who suffered from the social and cultural antagonism of the patriarchal binary world in which he'd grown up. And I wrote out, I haven't written out reactions to almost anything else, but this one I wrote out. I have scarcely ever read a greater example of gross misinterpretation caused by clearly ideological motivated reasoning. The idea that this man is teaching in the realm of literature and doubtless gives instruction on literary interpretation would be terrifying if I belonged to the camp that places paramount importance on literary interpretation. Reading that last phrase in particular nearly caused my blood to boil. Right after talking about Sidar and Sidene, he's talking about Robert Jordan clearly would have changed all this because of the, how bad the binary world was.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, throw that on the back cover and just let people know what they're getting into. I guess if they're going to read this book, is that kind of motivated reasoning that like, hey, worse. this is what I believe, so that's what Robert Jordan would believe.
It gets worse.
No, man.
So
I did find the Amateru sort of thing, by the way. So here's the question and answer. So the question was, in the same age, in a different turning of the Wheel of Time, could it be possible that it wouldn't be Rand's soul that was spun out as the dragon, but for a different female soul to take the role? Jordan said yes. Then this is sort of paraphrasing of some of this because this is a recording the Q and answer. But he goes on to say it would have to be in the differences between the same age in different turnings of the wheel. So imagine two tapestries hanging on the wall. You look at them from a different room. He goes on kind of a little bit sort of through the stuff here. So it's quite possible that someone other than Rand could be the reborn soul of the Dragon Reborn. And then he said, question, it would be the same soul or would it be a different soul? It would be the same soul. That is, this is his answer. It would be the same soul that is the belief of the world that was set up, and that it's the same soul. It's the soul of someone bound to the wheel, which is spun out for their purposes, for the wheel of time's purpose, really, or for the wheel's purpose, really, to attempt to rebalance the weaving of the pattern. But the soul would always be male. Souls don't change gender. So the soul of the Dragon Reborn is always going to be male, just as, someone else, so Amaseru's soul would always be a woman, male would always be a male. There's no like female dragon. But I think his point is that yes, it's possible that if there was an age where, say, Saidar was tainted instead of Saidin, or something like that, or similar events kind of transpired, but that the savior had to be a woman, then a different hero of the Horn might be recruited by the wheel to fix the pattern in that situation. And here's the thing, is that in his answer, he says, so just as Brigitta's soul is always born as a woman, just as Amaseru's soul is always born as a woman. There are divisions here, and they're not interchangeable. So he mentions her name in this answer, and sort of goes on to just say, like, that's kind of it. Like, Robert Jordan said that it's not possible to have a female dragon, and that if the wheel needed a female dragon, then it would just be a different champion of the light, which all of the heroes of the Horn are. Mm-hmm. They're all bound to the creator's sort of side of the conflict, right? So yeah, like, someone else could be the savior of an age other than Luz Theron, Rand al'Thor, the Dragon Reborn, right? But that doesn't make them the dragon, and there's nothing that makes Amaseru more or less likely to be that character than any other than
being mentioned after Brigitta.
Yep. And the linguistic sort of link to the name. So Amaseru sounds kind of like Amathera, right? Or Amaterasu or something like that.
I think it's Amaterasu,
Yeah, and it's I want to say Eastern sort of history, and has a similar connection with light and some other stuff like that. So it's one of those things where it's like people are doing a lot of heavy lifting to try and make her.
Jordan based her on Amaterasu Omikami, the goddess of the sun in Japanese mythology.
Yes. Yeah. So that right there, the fact that that's who the historical character is, the goddess of the sun in Japanese sort of is like, see, sun, the light, Lord of the morning.
Even though the male counterpart, Rand, we don't even have any clue who he's named after. The closest Livingston could come up with is that Robert Jordan wrote a Western and the main character's first name was Randall. That's the best he could come up with for an origin for Rand's name.
Well, the show did that then too, because they have Randall Simp. Sorry.
No, he just.
So the comment here is going at it exactly. So the sun goddess, and like, those are fine sort of parallels to make, but I think it's important to again go back to Robert Jordan's words himself, which is that he never actually said there's anything special about her other than her being a hero of the Horn, whose name we know, and who does have a historic counterpart that we can connect the name to, which all of the heroes sort of do, or many of them do. So it's a lot of motivated reasoning is what it comes down to.
So
I'll sum it there.
He mentioned all the side sardine stuff, and then didn't seem to take any particular issue with that. Till later on, he gets to talking about how there's seizing versus embracing, dominating versus surrendering, and he talks about how, oh yeah, some fans might be bothered by this, but then his reconciliation for this.
Some people don't like what Robert Jordan said about his world. We're just going to change it.
Well, what he's saying is they may think that because of this, Robert Jordan thinks men are strong and women are weak, which if you think that after reading Wheel of Time, you're just an idiot. But he explains this concept of seizing and embracing as unreliable narrators. He says,
oh my goodness,
more likely this kind of description is exactly what it appears to be. The limited understanding of the characters within his story, who can only comprehend their experiences against the background of their own lives in their own world. And his biggest piece of evidence for this is that Rand lights the pipe.
Which doesn't mean anything. First of all, we don't actually even know that Rand lights the pipe.
Yeah, and we don't know it had anything to do with the power.
And we have strong reason to think it has nothing to do with the power.
Yes.
Which is that Rand is surprised when it happens. So oh my goodness.
Yeah, I think my current head canon is that
two characters in world, both of them able to channel, both of them understanding this process as well as anyone could understand this process through to use something that Livingston would probably like, through their lived experiences. They talk directly to each other about the experience that is happening for them. And because they say that they're nothing like each other, I know that they're actually exactly like each other.
You're talking about in the stone?
Yes.
Yeah.
Imagine how many coming away from...
Yeah. How many birds and fish analogies do you need? I mean, I'll grant you that there's a lot of unreliable narratives.
Exactly. But fish can't touch the moon.
There's a lot of things people think are impossible turning out to be possible, but that's also strongly hinted at even before the things change. It's like,
so Trip, to answer your question here,
that was Livingston.
I think you're talking about the pipe, the lighting of the pipe. We know that Robert Jordan wrote the pipe lighting, and that Sanderson doesn't actually know the story behind it. So that was from the 10-year anniversary Q&A that he did. He said, yep, if you want to know the answer to that one, I don't know it. Harriet says that she doesn't know it. So, when you get to heaven, you can ask Jordan. He's the only one.
A lot of most of the final chapter was pretty much all Jordan, nothing from Sanderson, because he had a lucid evening towards the end of his life where he just he dumped out a bunch of information on Harriet and Maria and
yeah. All right. Well, we're getting up on 2 hours.
I'm almost done. Yeah. Almost done. Okay. According to Livingston, the only reason Rand is a man is because the only reason Jordan chose to make Rand a man is because it more closely tied to the myths that his story was built from and needed to grow into as the wheel turned. A story about broken masculinity and need of correction.
Wait. I thought that the whole story was about the patriarchy. So how can you both have that the story was foundationally about masculinity and also incidentally masculine? Oh man, that is quite something to say there. That is
Yep. Then the last real big thing is Arengar. The real difficulty for Arengar in this instance derives from the fact that he knew and lived a completely CIS gendered existence before the change. Yeah. So my response to this, he's basically saying, yes, this is a bad situation for Arengar to be in a situation where the identity doesn't match the body. But the only reason it's bad is because he's already conscious of having been a man beforehand. So what he's saying here is that transsexuals don't exist.
It's actually somewhat so I've heard this conversation before, and I think actually it's if you really want to like try and say that Robert Jordan was making a message about sort of transgender
Which he
sort of
wasn't in
issues,
any way,
which
in
he
any
wasn't,
direction at all.
which he wasn't in any way. I think actually what it was about explicitly was about the character Arangar and the way that he treated women and the way that he
Yeah,
lived his life before, and a sort of twisted sense of humor of the
poetic
dark one,
justice and
putting him in the body of the type of woman that he used to sort of mistreat, right? But anyway, the actual takeaway would be the primacy of biology versus your sort of kind of your image of yourself, because his time in a female body
yeah,
actually overcomes
overrides. Yeah,
his personality and identity and these types of things, and he becomes female.
yeah,
Just he has the connection of his soul, his ability to channel, which is we don't need to make this
yeah.
stream about that,
But
but I find it very hard to imagine how you could take the character of Arangar and make that into what he is making it.
yeah, he's the implication is that the the negative aspect of this is because Balthamo was a man before. So it's saying if Balthamo had not previously been a man, then his male soul being trapped in a female body would not be either negative or a punishment, which is exactly the opposite of the standard claim of things regarding sexuality, that there is a negative aspect and there is pain of a sort or whatever in being in a body that doesn't match your identity. So it's internally contradictory here.
You know what I guess I'll say, because I don't think this is really worth much of our time here, is I will
Yeah.
say that Livingston probably makes no claim himself to be an expert on this type of issue in question. And so we probably shouldn't expect him to have particularly sophisticated answers to these types of questions. So it doesn't necessarily bother me that it's not very sophisticated and that we can poke holes in it, because but I would also say that, like, well, maybe if you're not an expert on those things, you should just leave it out of your book that you're going to publish, that then is going to be subject to criticism where people read what you wrote. But hey, I'm not an expert either, and here I am talking about it. So
Yeah.
I will hold him to the same standard that I hold myself to.
Well,
And say
we're not claiming to be scholars. He repeatedly asserts
he
that he is.
fair point.
Here's another one that's less damaging but more amusing. He states as fact, without source given, that the Dark One, he states this as its fact, that the reason the Dark One changed Arangar into a woman is because a woman's body would be more practically useful for the Dark One's schemes. And that had nothing to do with punishment.
Again, we know that's not the case, because it's said in canon that it's actually just the Dark One happened to have a few bodies lying around, and they got put into the bodies that were available. And of the two bodies that he had available, he decided to, like, well, I can get a little bit extra out of putting it this way, where now it's sort of a joke that I'm playing on him, as well as I had these bodies lying around. Like, what? Okay.
I think that's the end of my notes.
Well,
Other than one point of confusion where he refers to the Misty Mountains as the central topographical feature in Lord of the Rings, which I guess that's correct if by central you mean like they're geographically kind of central to the landmass.
I can see that.
But when I was first reading it, I'm like, does he mean like thematically central? Because they are not.
Yeah. Okay, here. The easiest way that I know how to do this, and this is going to be a little weird, I do want to show everyone the map and let you maybe bring in just some commentary about what changes Robert Jordan requested. If you can,
I've got the sword photo as well.
Oh, yeah. Here, go ahead and share that, and then we'll move on to the map, and then we'll finish up with some closing thoughts here.
Share.
Actually, while you're looking on how to share it, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to hide us from the stream so that everybody can take a look at the map full screen behind us here. And then I'll bring us back in after about 10, 20 seconds or so. This screen, the map is also able to be searched. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm also going to put that, I'm going to put the link in the stream. So there's a link to it. Anybody can go check that out. And while we're on the stream here, you can take a look at it here. So I'll hide us momentarily. All right. So there's just a brief look at the map there. The map link is in the live chat, so please go look at that. Matt, what can you say about the requests that he wanted? And Roxas, yeah. So sizes was one of the large ones.
Yeah, the Sean Tran. I think it makes sense. You kind of have to have Sean Chan be so massive to have such a surplus of people to send over. The sort of archipelago nature of it helps with the great wealth of diversity amongst the Sean Chan in terms of ethnicities and all that. I take no issue with any of it.
If Aldan or anybody else from Australia is still in the chat here, I like that the land of madness it's very Australia looking.
That gets called out. That gets called out in Livingston. I don't think he gives a source for this, but he calls out as being associated with like the stereotype of Australia as dangerous and.
So that's funny. I mean, I would like to. Did they publish like the specific words that Robert Jordan said that he wanted to change with the map, or did they just publish
the only words that are changed? The only words they called out was it should be called the Madlands instead of the Land of the Madmen.
Okay. The sizes were also requested to be changed, right?
Yes. So the size of the Sean Chan continent. I don't think there were specific words in there. They specifically called it the Badlands thing many times.
That would have been nice. I think if you were going to do this, if you were going to share a new map and say this was, Robert Jordan requested this, they should have included like, here's Robert Jordan's own words on, here's the old map. Here's Robert Jordan's own words. Here's the new map that we got commissioned based on those requested changes, and, make the idea for yourself on whether or not this is a more true sort of depiction. But it is a good map. I think hey, of all the things that I've seen and heard of the book, the map seems pretty solid.
And I didn't, like I said, I didn't go over a lot of the etymology stuff because there's not that much to say about it. But there's a lot of it in here, and anybody who's interested in it will get a lot out of that, I think.
All right, and with that, let's go ahead and look at this sword. So this is the Robert Jordan sword that he actually had,
that he commissioned. Yes.
Okay, so this looks a lot like the replica sword that you could buy.
I don't have much familiarity with that, but yeah, that would make sense to me.
Like I think the Whitecloaks' very own Dane Bordhald, I believe, might have basically that sword.
Yeah.
So I'd say that is just probably confirmation that the original kind of replica sword, and let me see if I can even find it here, was pretty accurate, and
if they just bought one of those and used that, heck, get permission from Harriet to use this one. It would have been an improvement over what we got. Not that we saw the sword all that much.
So I'll say
I mean, I'll forgive them using katana if they actually show him learning from Lan and not learning the channel by surrendering to Sidar and.
Yeah. Anyway, all right. Yeah, we'll say pretty similar to the the sort of original sword, I guess, which is cool. That's Robert Jordan had one very similar to the one that you
Trip
actually still
is
can buy. So
okay. There's some conversation here about whether Randland is a globe or not. I'm gonna say it's a globe based on the fact that they talk about when they're using the Choden Cowl, they talk about the potential of cracking the world like an egg, and also
yeah, I think we
because
talked about
we
that in the
know
Discord.
it's our world. They've traveled to other planets, and John Glenn is referenced and all that stuff.
Yes. And that was the point that I was going to make, is that the Wheel of Time is our world, and therefore, yes, it's a globe because it's Earth, right? Um, so I think that's good. The thing I'll say there, so Jacob Ironside said the Blight's a lot bigger than I thought. Just remember map projections. So again, talking about this as a globe actually means that it's like Antarctica looks huge on a map at the southern pole, right? When in reality, it's just an island that's located at the pole, and it's fairly large, right? It's not tiny, but it is not nearly as big as it looks like on a flat projection map.
And
so, your Mercator chart that shows a globe stretched into a flat map going
Africa is bigger
than
it seems, and
yes. So just something to keep in mind, and that is the problem of.
They're talking about globe versus flat in the context of the show not having any clue where the sun's supposed to be at any given moment.
Okay. Yes, that one is an interesting problem for the show to be able to explain. Potentially a point light source that navigates overhead may better explain the show's sort of celestial bodies. Maybe Rafe Judkins is a flat earther. That would actually explain a lot. So, okay, let's circle back here. I think it's time for us to wrap up. Thank you guys to everyone who's been here. Final thoughts. Is it a thing that someone should buy, and what type of person do you think should buy it? And then out of 5 stars, give us your Amazon review, essentially.
Yeah, I would definitely say that there are people who should buy this with particular interest. There's enough, even if you just ignore everything that could possibly be speculation, there's lots of solid information in there. There's lots of citations in the back that, if nothing else, if you ever want to look some of this stuff up and you have access to the Citadel or whatever, when it cites something from the papers, it tells you what box it's in, what page number, what folder number, all this stuff. There's only by going over and writing my notes today that I discovered that there's a sort of a biography book that somebody wrote about notable literature people from Charleston, and there's a biography of Robert Jordan included in that. I'm probably going to be getting that and taking a look at that. There's even just links to lots of publicly known things that if you don't know where those things are, there's some links in there. There's some nice photos. They're not. I mean, he's got a photo of the barracks in the Citadel that likely had something to do with the inspiration for the White Tower. But when I just Googled photos of that building, one of the first results was that photo, and I don't think that's not new to the book or anything. But there's a couple of pictures of some of Robert Jordan's notes on like names and stuff. There's a family tree of Rand al'Thor, his real family tree, biological family tree, and compared to the Arthurian family tree. That's kind of nice.
That is actually pretty interesting. For those of you who are interested, here's the link in the chat there. That is that book that he said that has the biography of Robert Jordan.
It's called Fire in the Cradle.
I apologize. It's an Amazon.com link. Buy it from your local bookstore, not Amazon, but that's the one that came up. So
yeah, this is something I'm not particularly as interested in, but I think a lot of people are. Is there's a lot of information there about the different stages of the development of different characters and things. They had this name, like Nynaeve was originally sort of pretty strongly an evil character, who did a lot of bad stuff, and then ends up being like just top tier S tier Nynaeve.
I would say that makes it into the book. I wouldn't say evil, right? I wouldn't say evil at all, but I would say that she is a very angry character, and she has a very myopic sort of kind of perspective and objectives and things like that leads her to be an unlikable character early on, right?
Yes.
So
there's also a lot
I wouldn't have gone evil, but yeah, interesting.
This isn't really necessarily a point in the book's favor, but it's a reason to be familiar with it, which is that there's going to be a lot of things people are claiming are canon because they saw it in this book. And if you're familiar with the book, then you know where it came from, and you know it's not canon. I most recently saw an argument that Galad could channel, and there's some argument to be had there, but they're
Lady
using.
Fire is not in the chat. We can't fight this one out yet.
I'm not going to fight that issue, but the point is somebody was using bits from early stages of Lan and Galad, what was in these early stages as proof. And like by that token, Rand al'Thor is not named Rand al'Thor. He's named Rhys al'Thur or whatever. It's like
so that's actually an interesting point in general that I think is worth mentioning before we sign off here, which is something that you and I discussed talking about the early draft of that scene with Min, is that authors' notes and early drafts and things like that are not canon.
Although I'm going to reject
interesting.
I'm going to reject that premise for just a moment and bring up that Taman Dread is pretty much confirmed. In his notes in Lord of Chaos, he said that Nynaeve does not know that Taman Dread killed Asmodean, nor that he is Mazrim Taim. And then
you're saying that Jordan
in his
notes says that Taim killed Asmodean.
Yes, and that Taim is Taman Dread.
All right. Well,
his later notes contradict that, which of course we know because he changed his mind or whatever. But it's confirmed that at some point in his notes, Taim and Taman Dread, while writing Lord of Chaos, were the same person.
Yeah. So the only thing that I would want to say there is that, so Taman Dread has been known, I think, for a long time. That he had a plan for Taim and then changed it because he. Some people get conspiracy theory-ish about this, where they're like that he got frustrated that people guessed his big reveal, and so he changed
Obi just said that.
Fans. So I think a more charitable vision of this, and it matches with something that Harriet said. That Harriet said his writing process, and this is, I don't know if this is in the book, but I've seen her saying it in interviews and other writings, that his writing process was to like swing for the fences and like make huge changes and like just kind of do things. That he was not the outline planner. He had sort of his little spots here, but he would make relatively large shifts in a lot of different things. And so I look at it, my charitable take on it is that he had an idea and then decided that it's not the way that he wanted to go. It's not the story that he wanted to tell. I'll actually say that I think the idea of a forsaken, of a chosen being elevated from this age is actually an overall good to the story, that if Robert Jordan had written the final books, we might have had a more compelling and more interesting result too. And so, I think that we're frustrated with how Taim and Taman Dread's sort of story culminated in the Sanderson books. And so that colors our perception of his change.
Yeah,
we don't actually know fully what that vision would have been. So
Taman Dread as ruler of Shara was a Brandon Sanderson invention. He's pretty confident that Robert Jordan would have done the same thing if he had written it. But it was.
Yeah, there's enough. I think there's enough there. But anyway, the other point that I would make is that, and this is the part that actually is kind of surprising to me, is that Robert Jordan in Q&As and in public statements actually expressed sort of incredulity on why
that is
the
quoted.
Asmodean murder was such a strange.
That is quoted right before Livingston points out that right in his Lord of Chaos notes he said this.
That amuses me. It makes me question maybe some of his other question and answer sort of things in the past, because now you have the idea that like how reliable of a narrator was Robert Jordan as the author speaking to the audience at those events. We can
probably safely quarantine questions about unresolved mysteries in sort of their own category, where you're deliberately probably wanting to mislead people.
Yes. but he gave as a question and answer is like, yeah, it was Grandal, and like it's always confused me like why this was a big thing that people were concerned about. Like it was obvious that it was Grandal, and you're like, wait a second, like uh, it wasn't super obvious, and it makes sense that it wasn't obvious if it was a false trail, like he meant it to be somebody else and then shifted it to make it Grandal. Clearly that would confuse people, clearly that would lead to an unsatisfying sort of resolution. And so his like incredulity, not the fact that he said it, but the way he was like, yeah, I don't get why you're asking this question, like why is this even a thing. It's like, yeah, come on, like why. so that is an
I get a
amusing
very
takeaway.
my
Okay.
impression of that whole thing is very Tolkien Lewis mischievous side of himself. Just trolling people.
Maybe. Well, maybe Sanderson said it the right way in his thing. Those types of questions only James Rigney himself knows. Only Robert Jordan knows. So you will have to ask him when you see him. And final thing here, out of 5 stars.
I'll give it.
What are you giving it?
If I have to give a whole star number, I'll give 3, but I'd probably rather give 2.5. There's a lot of content in there.
All right, so maybe worthwhile having, not probably worthwhile poring over and doing all that type of stuff, but an interesting addition to a Wheel of Time collection.
Don't go looking for more canon details. That's just, you're not going to find it, by and large.
All right. Well, with that, I want to thank everybody who's still here in the chat, and I want to thank you for devoting a little more than 2 hours on this conversation. It's been pretty enjoyable. I think for me, I'll have to think. I'll sit and think on it a little bit. Like I said before, I was waiting for your review on whether or not it was going to be worth it for me to buy it. But I'll have to think about it. I think ultimately I'll probably pick it up because I'm a little bit of a completionist. I kind of want to read some of the things that you hinted at but didn't delve into because you can't do the whole book. And for OBG 70 here, maybe the White Cloak edition needs to come out. So we might have to do that. But if for nothing else, I really appreciated this conversation. And hopefully anybody watching at home who's lasted through this conversation has an idea of what the book is and whether or not they maybe want to give it a copy. I'm certainly not going to push people away from it. But now at least you know what you're buying. So there it is. Any final thoughts from you?
Todavía Andis y todos again.
Sounds good. And with that, hey everybody, thanks for showing up. Walk in the light.